Okay, so thank you all for joining. Thank you, Rohit, for starting the session. Guys, today we are covering a session on the database integration. This is a series of integration sessions which we are going to have. This would be the first session where we would mostly focus on the basics, right? Not only the basics of how do you work with UiPath, but a little bit basics about the databases, what are the things as a developer you should be aware of. We would also talk about how do you integrate, what are the different kind of databases you can interact and how, and all of that stuff we are going to have in this series, right? So in case you have only joined this, you at the end you can just join the Delhi NCR chapter and you would have the upcoming session directly in the database series, right? uh, Talking about myself, I would be a speaker for today. My name is Mukesh Kala. I am a 3 times most valuable professional. As of now, I am leading the Delhi chapter. I am a certified trainer and professionally working with RPA manager at professionally working as a RPA manager with a company called Boundaryless Group. I also have a YouTube channel called Tutorials by Mukesh Kala. You can happy to connect with you on the social media platforms. I have given all my details in the chat. You can find me on LinkedIn and happy to connect. Okay, having said that, guys, this is the 2 links which I want you guys. So Delhi NCR chapter link, which I have already posted on the chat. Feel free to go to that link and directly get all the updates directly in your mailbox. Also, we have a Delhi NCR meetup WhatsApp group, right? Here is a QR of the WhatsApp group. Feel free to scan the QR and you would be directly added to the WhatsApp group of the Delhi NCR where you will get the updates regarding the upcoming meetups, right? So I'll just wait for 5-10 seconds for you guys to scan the QR and join the group. Okay, cool. So if not, at the end also I'm going to display the same. Okay. So having said that, we can get started. Okay, so send me the WhatsApp group link. Okay, so we will send it while maybe well at the end of the call I can share it to you. I don't have it handy as of now. You can just scan this code and you can get it added, right? Okay, so today we are going to start with a series which is called a database series. I'm not directly jumping to connection to the database via UiPath. However, I would like to start from what exactly is the database. I would assume that most of you are coming from programming background and some of you might be absolute beginner who have no idea about what all this database is, right? So whenever I talk about database, it is a place where I can store the data. So for example, today I give you a list of employees and I say that, hey, you store this list of data. You can store that in a notepad file, you can store that in an Excel file, or I would say that I would like to store it in a place where I can manage it. So a database is a place where you can store the structured information, and a system which is actually controlling this database is called a database management system. So first thing, many people are there who has a confusion in what is DB, what is DBMS, what is SQL Server, what is MySQL, right? All these terms are interrelated, but it is important for us to know the exact difference, right? So the first term which you guys should remember is the database, which is a place where you just store the data. Now to manage the data, I require a system. Such as to manage the library, I require a library management system. Similarly, if I have to manage and control a database, I would require something which is called database management system, right? Together, if I talk about data and DBMS, it is sometimes referred as a database system. We have different kinds of database which are available, and most of the database are using SQL for writing and querying the data, right? We'll talk about SQL. If you don't understand what is SQL, we will explain step by step, right? So the first thing you should remember is what exactly is a database and what exactly is a database management system. Okay, next slide. When I talk about the databases, I means the database management system, we can have a lot of databases, right? It's not like always that my data would be always stored in rows and columns, right? On the left hand side, you see these are the most common types of databases. There are other database also, but these are the most common one, right? The first one is a relational database. where I say that the data is stored in tables in set of rows and columns. So if I have some data which I can organize in a form of table, rows and column, I would say that it is a relational database. The next kind of database is object-oriented database, where instead of data being stored in tables, it is stored as objects. Then you have something which is called distributed database, where the database consists of two or more files located at different sites, right? Distributed database. You have something which is called data warehouses. You have something which is called NoSQL databases, non-relational databases, right? Then you have something which is called open source databases. Then you have something which is called cloud databases, which is stored in cloud. It can be public, private, hybrid cloud, right? So it's not always that whenever we talk about database, I'm always going to store the data in rows and columns, right? So before I go to UiPath and connect and insert the data, step one would be to understand what kind of data base I'm integrating to, right? So let's say today I have a data which is on cloud, right? So I would look for how do I connect UiPath to a cloud database, right? So these are the common type of databases which are available. There are list goes on, right? Recently, you might have heard something which is called LLM, right? Large language database. You have vector databases, right? Lots of databases, but these are some of the common ones. Okay, cool. So we have seen what is data. We have seen there are different kind of database, and then we require a management system to manage this, which is called a database management system. In other words, I can say that I have a database, I have end users, right? A lot of employees, a lot of developers, programmer. To connect both of them, I have a layer in between, which is called database management system. Okay. So a database management system is responsible for providing administrative features, performance monitoring, backup, recovery, right? So let's say you created a database. Which user has to have what access? Should I give create access to everybody, delete access, updates? What access should be given to whom? Who will recover the data? Who will fine tune the database? Where would I do the recovery? Right? So to manage all of this, I require a system, and that system is called database management system. Now, some of the most common database management system, which you guys might heard of, is Microsoft SQL, MySQL, Microsoft Access, Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle. Different are the vendors, and they have a different of database management system. So first, we have something which is called database. To manage that database, we have database management system, and now different vendors in the market has different DBMS. Oracle has one, Microsoft has one, right? Okay, so that's DBMS. Then today I am going to talk about the relational database, and that is the most common which is being used in enterprises, where the data is stored in rows and columns, right? And remember when I talked about RDBMS, relational database, where the data are stored in rows and column. So if I have to manage a database system where the data is stored in rows and columns, that means I am referring to relational database management system, also known as RDBMS. Okay, so that's where RDBMS. So whenever you heard a term RDBMS, that means that it's a relational database, which means the data is stored in rows and columns. It is a database management system. That means it is an interface between your actual database and the users, right? And since we are talking about RDBMS, here the data would be stored in tables. What is a table? Simply rows and columns, right? So that's RDBMS. Next, there is a common term which is called SQL, right? We say that, hey, do you know SQL? What is SQL Server? So everybody understood that yes, we have data stored in a database. You have a lot of database. If you have to store data in rows and columns, you call it as a relational database. Now, what is the SQL, right? And why should I even worry? SQL stands for Structured Query Language, which means that RDBMS is sitting on a place. Now, RDBMS has a lot of data. I cannot tell RDBMS that, hey, RDBMS, give me all the employees whose salary is greater than 50,000. I'm speaking in English. and RDBMS does not understand English, right? I cannot tell him in my native language that give me all the tables name, delete this data. I require a query language, which the RDBMS can understand. So that query language is SQL. That's why structured query language. So it's a language for storing, manipulating, retrieving data in the databases. And SQL specifically designed to work with RDBMS, relational database management system. That's why whenever we are writing queries in SQL Server and all, we use SQL as the query language, right? All the relational database like MySQL, MS Access, Oracle, SQL Server are using SQL as their database language. So what exactly is a SQL? Query language where a user can write a query, get the data and process it, right? Now, whenever we talk about databases, there is a common term which you should know, which is called CRUD, C-R-U-D, create, retrieve, update, and delete. Okay, so I can perform operations on databases. I can create it, I can retrieve, I can update, and I can delete. SQL allows to do all of this. SQL allows me to execute the queries, insert the data, create the table, stored procedure, all of that. Whatever connection I have to do with the database can be done with the help of SQL. And specifically, when I'm talking about SQL, I am trying to communicate to something which is called RDBMS, Relational Database Management System. Okay, that's why in UiPath, whenever you try to write a query, it says that write a SQL query. Why you are writing an SQL query? Because you are trying to connect to a RDBMS. Okay. So that was still SQL. Okay. Now, the common type of databases and which we are covering in this session are the two. One is SQL Server 2019. The other database, which is an open source database, is a PostgreSQL. Both of them, I'm going to show today how you can install it and how you can connect it to UiPath. What are the things which are required, right? So there is a link, which is this one, which when I share the PPT, you will all get it, right? So SQL Server 2019 is a version, right? You have sometime the latest one. I'm not sure this one when I'm creating this tutorial. When I was creating this was 2019, which was the most stable, right? So Microsoft is SQL Server is a product of Microsoft. If you have to install SQL Server, you need this configuration: 512 memory, one gigabyte of RAM, recommended this, and this is the processor speed, right? So now when you go to this website, right, it will ask you to install SQL Server. But when you go to the website will show you two things. The website will show you SQL Server, and the website will also show you SQL Server Management Studio. Now you might think, Mukesh, we are installing SQL Server. I understood what is SQL. Now what is this? What is SQL Server and what is SQL Server Management Studio, also known as SSMS, right? So let's talk about the Microsoft SQL Server. So first, whenever I go to Microsoft and I say that, hey, Microsoft, I need a database. Microsoft say that, hey, here is your database. Where is my database? That database is Microsoft SQL Server. So Microsoft SQL Server is your actual database, relational database provided by Microsoft. It can do all of the stuffs which we have communicated in the first slide. See the last line where it says that Microsoft SQL Server belongs to the databases category. Microsoft SQL Server is a database. Now, I have installed a database. I am a business user. I am a human user. I want to communicate. I need a studio. I need a database management system. I require an interface to connect to this Microsoft SQL Server. And that interface is called Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, also known as SSMS. So that's why you would see that SSMS is a database tool and Microsoft SQL Server is a database. So whenever you are trying to connect to a database, you need to understand SQL Server is your actual database and you are using SQL Server Management Studio to connect and update Fire query to this, right? How does this look like? Let me quickly show it to you. Okay, so this is my computer. I'll show you how to install it. If I search here SSMS, okay, It stands for SQL Server Management Studio, right? That means this is an interface which will allow me to query, create, retrieve, update database on a SQL server. So first I would have installed SQL Server, and now I want to communicate with that. That's why I have used SQL Server Management Studio. If I click on it, it looks something like this, right? And now I can contact, communicate, write tables, query, delete, anything I can do, right? So that's SQL Server Management Studio versus SQL Server, right? I'll just take a pause, guys, and let me know in the chats, right? Are you guys following along with me? Yes, no? Did you guys understand what is till this point, right? Database, DBMS, SQL Server, and SQL Server Management Studio. Great. Awesome. Thank you. So till this point, we have understood that we have SQL Server, which is the actual database, and then we have SQL Server Management Studio, which is actually managing this, right? Now, I want to install it, right? What should I do? You will go to this website, which Microsoft.com SQL Server download. You will see this option, right? Where it will ask you whether you are a developer or whether you are this one, right? So both of them are mentioned here. Both of them are free, right? So you just click on this button, which says Microsoft SQL Server Express Edition free version of SQL Server, right? See guys here, it's important, SQL Server. That means we are now installing only the database. You go to this website, click on that, that will download an exe, click on the install button, and it will show you this window, right? So I have taken the screenshot because I don't want to waste complete time, right? So basic, select the basic, select the installation location. Where do you want to install? Keep it open, wait for this to complete, right? So once I complete this, I will get something which is called SQL Server 2019. How about getting the SQL Server Management Studio, which is SSMS, right? Once it is successfully completed, this same installation package will have these four buttons for you, where it will say connect now, customize, install SSMS, and close, right? So when you're installing any database management system, the database itself tell you that do you want to install an SSMS or not, right? If you don't want, just click on close. But if you want to interact with it, you need to install a management studio. So that's why I just click on this button which says install SSMS. This opens a new web page, which is download SQL Server Management Studio, right? And you just click on this version, this button, which is on the screen, free download of SQL Server Management Studio, and it will automatically download. And once it is downloaded, it will show you that interface and it know that, yes, I have to connect to SQL Server, right? So you download it, installation, wait for it to complete. And once it is completed, you would have the SQL Server available in your computer. Okay, so I'll just minimize this. Okay, so I'll just close this and let's start from fresh, right? I have already opened it, right? So once you have installed both the things, you have installed the SQL Server, you have installed the Management Studio. To get started, just go to the Start menu and search for SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio. Click on that and wait for this to load. Okay, so SQL Server Management Studio would be loading, right? So we'll just wait for it to load. Okay, I think I didn't click on it or what? Okay, I'll click on it. It's opening. Yeah, okay. So when you open it for the first time, right? So it shows you what exactly you want to connect, right? Because this is a SQL Server Management Studio. Now, in this, it is asking me, Mukesh, what do you want to connect? Do you want to connect database, reporting services integration, Azure SSI integration? What do you want to connect, right? So to get started with, select with something which is called this one, right? Now, this one is my server name. So by default, when you launch this for the first time, it will automatically have your SQL Express, which you installed first, and it will get your password. If it is not available here, just go to this drop down, browse for more, and here you would have the same thing in the database engine. This is my laptop, right? So this is my current laptop which I'm using. So that's why it says that I am going to use the engine which is installed in this laptop and here, right? Now, sometime you might be working in a company where you have a reporting service, integration service, Azure, right? You can use this one. And in case you are want to connect to a network, you can always use this network instance as well, right? Now, once you have this, how do you want to connect to the database? There are two ways to connect to any database. One is called the Windows authentication, and then these are all the other authentication, right? Azure Directory, SQL Server authentication. Windows authentication means use the user ID and the same user which is logged into this computer. It's like an AD authentication. So if I say Windows authentication, it's not going to ask me that what is the user and what is the password. If you see here, it has automatically understand that yes, this is Mukesh laptop, the user who is logged into Mukesh, and I don't require the password. Whereas if you go by the SQL Server authentication, it will ask you for your login ID and the password. Whenever we talk about the enterprise databases, you work for client or any customer, right? That place you would always get these three things at least from your database provider. You will get the server name, you will get the login, and you will also get the password of the complete thing, right? So if I have to connect to any database, I would require the server name, I would require the user name, and I would also require the password, right? For your thing, you can just go to Windows authentication and you can just click on connect like this, right? And what would happen? It will go and it will simply connect to the database, right? So it's connected to the, SQL server. Sorry, my bad. I told database. It's connected to the SQL server, right? Which we installed, actual database. Now, in the database, this is a relational database. That's why when I go to the database, I have this option, right? I can right click here, create a new database, export, import. Inside the database, I have created something which is called UiPath. Inside the database, you can have tables, and the table would have your actual data, rows and columns, right? And once you have the table, like I have employees table, department table, orders table, then you can do create, retrieve, update, and delete, right? So till this point, we have seen what is SQL, SQL Server, SSMS, how to install it, and all of that, right? So in case, right, you are absolute beginner. So I just wanted to show you guys that I have already covered this in a step-by-step manner, right? I'm just going to post one link on the chat, right? So that's a playlist link which I have covered the complete database series, right? So this is a playlist which is available here on my YouTube channel, where I have done this installation in a step-by-step manner. The same thing is explained, and this show all about the databases, right? So as an RPA developer, if you want to understand this, you can just follow this playlist, right? So the first video has all these steps in a step-by-step manner. So you can follow along and you will get the SQL Server SSMS with you guys. Okay. Now, if I talk about UiPath, right? How does this thing connect to UiPath? Okay, so now we have installed SQL Server, we have the database, and let's say till this point I have created a UiPath database, right? Now let me go back to my UiPath Studio. Okay, I'll close this. I'll close this as well. Okay, and first thing, whenever we start with the database automation, right? Can anybody tell me, this is not a test, right? Would I need to add the database dependency in my project? What do you guys think? If I have to do an Excel automation, right, I have to use UiPath.Excel dependencies. If I have to do a Word automation, I have to use the Word dependencies. Similarly, do you think that if I have to, yes, absolutely correct, right? Because how would I get the activities otherwise, right? So this is my project. If I go to the project, by default, the database dependencies are not added. So you'll simply go to the dependencies, whichever project you want to connect, right click on it, click on this button which says manage, go to all packages, okay, and search here UiPath databases. Okay, I think I just forgot the name. Yeah, UiPath.database.activities. Okay, so it's the name UiPath.database.activities. This is the package you need to install. Click on install, save it, and you would have these dependencies available, right? So the first prerequisite in UiPath to connect to any database is you need to have the database activities, right? So once you have this database activity, go to this panel, which is activity, where you have activities to drag and drop. In the installed, I'll scroll down to something which is called databases, I guess. Yeah, here. In the installed app integration databases, you have all these options which are available, right? Some of them you might be able to relate that what it would do, right? But the first step one is how do I connect, right? The step one is how do you connect, right? So I'll go here and I'll create a new sequence. I'll call this sequence as connect. I'm trying to connect it to the SQL server which we have just installed, okay, which is this guy. Okay, sorry, I think I opened multiple windows. I'll close this. Yeah, which is this guy here, right? Now, for every SQL database, or I would say SQL server, if you right click on that, you go to properties, okay, to connect to the database to any application, be it UiPath, be it a .NET application, any application, you would always require the connection properties, right? So I'll again show, right click on the SQL server, go to the properties, and here you would have some option which is called view connection properties. That if somebody wants to connect to this SQL server, what are the things it require? So as you can see, it is showing me that Mukesh, you are using Microsoft SQL Server Edition 64-bit. This is the product version. The main thing which is required is the server name. What is my server name? This is my server name. This is my computer name. Some whenever you are connecting to some of the databases is also require to have the laptop host name and some other details, right? So this property wizard show you everything. But the important thing for you to get is this one, which is the server name. I can Control A, Control C, okay, and I'll just paste it in the notepad so it's easier for me to refer, right? So this is my server name, okay. I'll copy this. Let's go back to UiPath and we have to connect, right? So in the databases, I have this activity which is connect to databases, right? So I'll drag and drop it here. Okay. Now this activity has something which is called configure the connection. So I'll click on this guy, which is configure the connection. And it is asking me two things. What is your connection string? We'll talk about in a little bit moment. Let's park it for a while. New database connection. Yes, we want to have a new. Let's click on this button which says connection wizard. Okay. Now it is asking me, what is your data source? Access, SQL Server database, ODBC, or what, right? Can anybody tell me on the chat what exactly is my data source, right? Anything what comes to your mind, right? There's no right, wrong answer, right? What should I select? Yes, Microsoft SQL Server, right? That's what we installed, right? So that's why it was important to give you that background. So I'm selecting Microsoft SQL Server. Selected. It's provided by Microsoft.NET. All the details are filled for me, right? Now it is asking me, what is the server name, right? What should I put here? What is my server name, guys? What would be the server name?
The copied text
Absolutely correct, right? The
which you
one which
copied in Notepad.
Notepad, right? So that's what we have, right? So that's why I have copied it. I'll paste it here. And now the same thing, Windows authentication, SQL Server authentication, right? If I go for SQL Server authentication, it is going to ask me for the username and password, safe password, self-explanatory. My database was connecting with Windows authentication. I am using the Windows authentication, right? Now, here, as soon as I put it here, see, I had the database UiPath. getting the UiPath. I have the temp data, getting the temp DB, right? The master model and the MSDB are the default databases, so they are already coming, right? But I created two databases. I created a UiPath database, temp DB. Both of them are available here. I'll select UiPath database, and you can always click on this button, which is called test connection. Test connection means test the connection, whichever details I have got. I'll click on this button, test connection, and it says that test connection succeeded. That means whatever you have provided me, I am able to connect to that database through this setup. This looks good. And I say, okay. Now, as soon as I clicked OK, I got this thing. Copy and let me paste it to the notepad. Right? I got this thing. Let's try to understand this thing. What exactly is this, right? Absolutely simple. Separated by semicolon. I'll hit enter here. Where is this? The second, this value. Okay. So UiPath automatically created this string for me, which says that Mukesh, you are connecting to this data source, right? That's what we have initialized. Initial catalog is equal to UiPath, which means that database, whichever you are connecting here, I'll go close this, cancel this here. In the databases, we have this UiPath. So that showing me that you are connecting to the UiPath database. Okay. And it was successful. The next thing it shows me is integrated security is equal to true. This means that I am using a Windows authentication. Okay. If you provide user ID and the password there, then this integrated security won't come in picture and you would have your username and the password. Okay. Now, whenever I am working in a real-time project, right? Let's say I have created this automation in the development machine, absolutely working fine. But if I move it to the higher environment, testing, production, I cannot go to the production machine. I'll open that connection wizard, change my code as per the production machine and do this, right? That's not possible. So what we need to do is always, whenever we are connecting with the actual database, we always use something which is called connection string. So all these things like this name, this initial catalog, integrated security, if not we are using username password, everything is kept in something which is called config file, right? So in the config file, you can keep this complete thing that when I move the environment, I'll say that, okay, this is changed, change it. Or in your config file, you can just mention these as individual attributes like server name, initial catalog, which is database name, and then you simply do a string manipulation and you store all of that in a string variable, something like this. I'll take an assign activity, drag and drop it here. And I will say that this is my connection underscore string, right? And the same thing, I'll put it in a, sorry, my bad. Yeah. The same thing I will have in a string variable, right? So as of now, I am hard coding this, but I hope the concept is clear. Connection string, right? And you will store this in a variable. And now wherever you want to use the connection, I'll go to the configure connection. Don't hard code. I'll just pass that connection string here. Okay, so that way it will get this thing. And in the real-time automation, these variables, all of this, you can take it from config, assets, whatever your automation suggests, right? So that's about connecting to the database, right? Now one question arises, how would I know that time when I was opening that window, right? It shows me test connection was successful. If I'm working as a developer, before I do anything here, right? So before I write any automation, so let's say I'll take some activities here. Okay, for now, let's take right line. Okay, so let's say here something I want to write an automation to fire the queries or something, right? I want to do some manipulation, data table manipulation and all with the databases. But how would this activity know the next activity, whether the connection was successful here or not. This activity does not know, right? So database activity, whenever you connect, if you go to the properties, connection string, simple thing, right? I hope you understand. What is the provider name? Microsoft.sql.sql client. So whenever we go to any client database, we ask this thing. Secure string, in case you want to have pass some secure string to establish the connection, right? This is not encrypted, but you can provide it as. And there's an output, it give you a connection object, right? So I'll create a hit control plus K, that is the shortcut to create any object. And I will say that this is con underscore obj. Hit control plus K to create a variable. And now if you go to the variables, you can see that a database connection object is created. So I'll just put a breakpoint here and I'll run this automation in a debug mode, right? I want to see whether my database is connected successfully or not. The automation is running. I saw that yes, it was connected successfully, but how would the other part of the automation know? So before you do anything on the databases, you need to make sure that your database is connected. And that as an RP developer is done with the help of that connection object, right? So if I go to the database here, you would see that the connection object is showing me some value. State is equal to open. This object is initialized. Okay. So if I just say here, if the connection object is null, it says that the state is equal to open, right? All these details you have. By default, it has a value of null. So in case you are getting a value of null, that means your database is not connected, right? Let's try to see that as well, right? So let's say by mistake, you have got some different value, and I'll just remove this L from this laptop and I'll make it app top, right? So I made some mistake here, right? And now I would say save. Because this was a string, this activity is not showing me an error, right? So let's say you got some credential connection string for some other developers and now you want to test. Let's try to save this, debug the file, right? If everything was okay, my object was initialized, it was having that value. By default, that variable has a value of null. So in case your connection string is incorrect, it's not able to connect, right? Let's see what happens. Okay, we'll just wait for the execution. Okay, it is trying to connect to AppTop, which is not there. And it says that, hey, I have got some network related instance, right? And if you see this connection object, which is null, right? So based on this connection object, you can say that, hey, if this is the connection object is null, you can have this. The other way is you can surround this activity with a try catch block. In the catch block, you can catch this exception and you can see that what exactly is the error, right? It clearly says that the instance of the name is not correct, anything, right? So that way, there is no point in running the automations further if you're not able to connect to the database, right? And how that connectivity can be checked? By just using this output variable, which is connection object, right? So this is how you connect to the SQL Server. Okay, cool. So that was about SQL Server connecting to the SQL Server. Okay. There is one more type of database, which is an open source database, which is known as PostgreSQL. Some of you might have heard it. Some of you might be listening it for the first time, right? So PostgreSQL is an open source database. Same like that it was by Microsoft. This guy, PostgreSQL, is an open source database. These are all the things which the PostgreSQL provide to you. Relational database, it's had ACID compliance, extensibility, support for advanced data type, and everything, right? Some of you might be thinking that what is the difference? I have this grid for you, right? Which is the difference between a SQL Server and the PostgreSQL. Licensing wise, SQL has a license cost. If I have to do it for a client customer, I need to have a paid license. It do have a free version, which I and you were using. PostgreSQL is open source and always free. Compatibility wise, SQL Server is compatible with Windows, Linux. This can work with Windows, Linux, Mac OS, right? All of these things are available for you, which you can just refer when I share the slides with you, right? So two type of databases. One is a paid database and the other is a free database called PostgreSQL. Now a question arises, if I want to connect to something which is an open source database, how would UiPath be able to do that, right? So that's what I'm going to show next. Steps are absolutely simple. The first step is same like I installed the SQL database. I installed the PostgreSQL database. It has simple thing which is called download Postgres. If you go to this website, I'll click on that to show it to you. Okay, so this one, I'll hit Control C. Let me go to the browser. I'll paste it here. This is the open source database, right? So you just can come to this website, and here you have all the version of whichever version you want to install, right? Absolutely simple database. Just click on install and it will be installed, right? This is how this database look like. I'll just quickly show it to you. The first database which I show was a SQL, and this is a database which is in PostgreSQL, right? Because it is a relational database, most of the things you would see at same, right? That the database is swimtext, Postgres, swimtext, and all, right? So these are all the database. There it is called tables. Here it is inside the schemas, and then you have the tables, right? So a little bit difference, but query wise, this guy is also using SQL. So if you have a knowledge of SQL, you can use the PostgreSQL, you can use the SQL Server, you can use the Oracle, right? But PostgreSQL is more kind of, I would say, friendly, and it has a lot of new intuitive features, right? You can directly edit, alter the tables, lot of things it has, right? So that's a different discussion altogether, but this is an open source database which you can also install, right? Same concept applies to this also. So I have installed a SQL Server this. When you are working with Microsoft, right, you do not have to install the drivers. The SQL Server Management Studio automatically installs the driver for you. What do you mean by driver? To connect to that database, you require a driver. So SQL Server Management Studio take care of everything. However, whenever you work with any open source database, you require additional drivers, right? It can be any open source. So all these database also provide you the drivers, right? So this is just an plain MSI file. You just go here to this website and you download this. You can just refer to any of the forum that I want to install this driver. You will get all these files, right? I install the PostgreSQL, I install this driver as well, right? Now the next question arises, for the SQL Server Management Studio, you had in the database, while I was configuring this connection, right? I had this connection wizard here, right? I could select this, but PostgreSQL is not here, right? And I may be using a different data source, right? Where is that? So for any of the other kind of databases, you have to create a connection, right? How does that happen? Absolutely simple. Just pay some attention, right? So whenever you install a driver, okay, it can be an Oracle driver, ODBC driver, driver for Postgres, anything, you install it, it's installed on a computer. Then every computer has something which is called data sources. Okay, so you will go to data sources and it will open a window which would be something like this. Now here you will configure all the databases as per the drivers, right? So as you can see, I installed the PostgreSQL driver. It is available here. So it was not available by default. First time when I come here, it was absolutely blank. So I went to user DSN. I click on this button which says add, and then it added me and it showed me all of these things. So since my driver was already installed, I have driver for ODBC, I have for Excel, I have for Postgres. So that's why I am getting all this, right? I'm even having the SQL Server driver. So I went here, I selected this button, and it shows me this wizard that how do you want to connect, right? Now, if you see here, I already connected it for my PostgreSQL. I click on configure and you can see that I have connected all these things. What is your data source? What is the database name, right? So there it was initial catalog, but when you are creating, you have to specify which database you want to connect. So I want to connect to SwimStats. This is the port, the server and the port, the username and the password, right? And now if I go to my this guy, sorry. So here you have already connected. I can click on this button which says test, right? So there, when I was testing, I could test it there. But if I go here and I say test, okay, so it's trying to connect to my local system, right? And this server is my personal server. I am running my computer on 192.168.0.107, right? All of these steps are absolutely simple. You just need to have a little bit knowledge on server and all, right? So now if you can see, it's saying me that Mukesh, I'm not able to connect to this server. Why? It says that there is no port running on it, right? So I can just go to the command prompt, right? I just changed my connection, right? So for this call, I might have changed the Wi-Fi connection and all. So I'll go to the this, which is a CMD, and I can see that I am in 192.168.0 and 109, whereas here I am connecting to 107. And that's why it says that Mukesh, you are on 109 and here you are using 107. How would I connect, right? So I just make it to 109. I'll save this and then I'll just reopen it and it should work. Okay. Now, once you have done that setup, okay, in your UiPath Studio, now when you come back to your UiPath Studio,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, would you mind repeating that ODBC setup?
yeah, sure, I can do that. That's not a problem. Okay. So, okay, so we downloaded the database, we downloaded the driver. Okay, we are okay till this point. We
Yes,
downloaded the database, we downloaded the driver.
driver.
Okay, so you have the database, you have the driver. Whenever you install SQL, you don't have to go by all these steps, right? But whenever you are installing open source database and all, you need require driver and all these things, right? Then you simply go to the start menu and you search here ODBC data sources. Okay, open that and it will open something like this. Okay, now I have already all these sources connected. For you, it won't be here. You just go here into click on add button and it will show you this window that which data source you want to connect. And all these are coming from which all servers you have installed on your computer, right? Which all drivers you have installed. So it is asking me select a driver, right? What is the driver? So for me, the driver is Postgre, right? So I just select PostgreSQL, click on finish, and it will open the same window. Most of the things pre-populated for you. See, 192.168.0.109, right?
Yeah.
Everything pre-populated, this password, everything pre-populated. I click cancel. So last time it was not working because I have made it old connection, so my IP might have changed, right? And in case your IP changes and you are not able to connect, you just go to command prompt on your computer, CMD, okay, and type a command which is called IP config, which means IP configuration, and it shows me that IPv4 address is this, right? 192.168.0.109. This is nothing but just I am telling my database driver that you have to connect to this database IP. So let's say you want to do an enterprise edition, you would require these details, right? IP, username, password, USN, and all that. Once you have that driver which is created, you come back to UiPath, drag and drop an activity which is called connect to database. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mukesh, sorry to disturb you again.
Mhm.
What if that database is somewhere it is installed?
So
Consider
yeah,
the
so that
relation.
guy need to provide you all those details.
Okay, those data connection you mean to say?
Yes, the
Connection point?
connection string,
Okay,
right?
fine.
So you'll just come here, you will click on this button, configure connection. And now I can use this connection wizard, right? It shows me the data sources, right? So I can click on other here. All these data sources are available for you, right? But for PostgreSQL, I want to show you how does a connection string look like. Okay, so I'll show this and let me show this one, right? So I just connected this before, right? So this is the same activity, connect to the database activity. To answer your question, Bala, right? So same thing. Let's say I want to connect to a database which is a different location. I have done all of these things, right? Now, if I go to the configure connection, you will notice this. This is a syntax, right?
Yeah.
So I hope now you understand where this is coming from. PostgreSQL 30. It is coming from the same ODBC, right? See, ODBC. I'll just show that to you as well here. PostgreSQL 30, that becomes your DSN here. Then this is not integrated security is equal to true. That means it is going to use the user ID and the password. So I go here, I can click on configure and I can see that it was using the username as Postgres and the password was admin, right? So it's hidden here, but the password for my Postgres is admin, right? So again, that again depends, right? You can encrypt it, put it in the credential asset, do it, all this still remains with you, right? But to connect to the database, you just need to provide this thing. Postgres SQL 30 user ID is this, password is this, and the same thing is now in your this,
Got it.
right? So in case you want to connect to that, you just need to have this DSN, right? Now, two options. Either you configure your DSN yourself, or you ask the guy to create a DSN and provide directly with the DSN user ID and the password, use it in the UiPath activity and just use the same thing like connect to database and it will connect it, right? And the other properties are exactly the same. Connect to the object, connection string, see the provider name, database.odbc, all of that exactly remains the same, right? So that was
Yeah.
about the,
Yeah, and last
yeah,
question. Okay.
yeah.
So once we connected and we are done with the development,
Hmm,
and we want to move that board to the different mission, do
hmm.
we need to do that setup again in that particular mission?
In that particular machine as in, so you need to have that DSN, right?
Yes.
So
That ODBC
yes,
DSN, we need
so
to do
that
it, right?
connection you need to make it, right? So most of the companies, the database admin or whosoever is managing that machine does it for you. But if you
Mhm.
are the admin, you have to do that.
Okay. Fine. Thank you.
Okay, great, right? So we have installed and connected two kind of databases, right? All of these links, everything I will share, so you can try it on yourself. Next thing comes, whenever we have to connect and communicate to these databases, and this is the last topic for today. Whenever we have to communicate to this, I say that, hey, I have to use something which is called SQL, structured query language. I have to query to that, right? But query language can be of different types. It can be DDL, it can be DML, or it can be DCL. So SQL standard query language, structured query language, where you communicate to PostgreSQL, SQL Server, Oracle, anything. Further divided into three major categories: DDL, DML, and DCL. DDL means data definition language, where you have to create, drop, rename, and alter, where you work on the structure. All the queries which actually work on the structure are called the DDL. Create, drop, rename, alter. Anything which actually has to do with the data which is inside the tables, update, insert, merge, that is called DML. Any queries which you actually work for the control, like grant the access, revoke the access, all of that is called DCL, also known as the data control language. So SQL as a language is again divided into three categories. Basics of database should always be with an RPA developer, right? So that is DDL, DML, and DCL. Okay. Now, whenever we talk about any relational databases, we need to store the data. And this is how the relational database look like, where we store the data in form of tables, right? Tomorrow, in the tomorrow session, we are going to create one small use case where I would insert, retrieve, update, delete the databases, right? So that we will see. But for today's, whenever we store data in relational database, we have table. All the tables has something which is called fields. These are the rows and these are the columns. So whenever you see any data structure which is having this structure, that means that is a relational database management system, and the data is stored in rows and columns, right? So that was the last thing which I wanted to cover today, tables, right? Tomorrow session, we'll see more about connecting, creating, retrieving, updating, bulk update and all with UiPath and databases, right? So I would take a pause for any questions if you guys have. So I'm done. I can stop the sharing, and somebody was asking about the group. Here it is. Okay. So guys, open forum to all of you to ask any question, appreciate your feedback, right? Yeah.
Hi Mukesh, this is
Hey,
Suresh here.
hey Suresh.
Yeah, very informative session and good to start with the DB connection. I have just a simple question like
Yes, sir.
for open source DB. So each time we install some open source DB, we need to install the driver as well and
Driver as well. Yeah.
create the DNS.
Yeah.
And
DSN. Yeah.
yeah, even within the database, if we have some different schema, like here we use SIM something. So if you want to use some other schema, we have to create another DNS for that.
Another. Yeah. Yes. Correct.
Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Okay, so any more questions, guys? So this is the WhatsApp group. You can connect, and tomorrow same time I would be having the next updated session, right? Since I received some of the feedback, and if you guys really like this session, right, I want you guys to just inform your network so that each of us can learn. You can amplify this. You can share the feedback over the LinkedIn. I would be happy to connect with you guys, right? I'll again show my details in case you are not connected to me. Happy to connect with you, all of you, and just share your feedback, right? So how did you like the session, good, bad? If you want to know more about this, happy to have that, right? So I have already shared one video link, which is the playlist link, which is here. This is the complete database playlist where I am teaching database to my students. So in case you like how I am presenting, I do the same on my YouTube channel. This is the complete playlist on databases you can refer. Okay, so I don't see any questions, so we can connect tomorrow. Okay, Shravan. Okay, so whosoever is not able to get the WhatsApp link, I don't have it handy. So you can just drop me an email, guys. So I'll just drop my mail, or you can just drop me a LinkedIn message, right? I can just directly send you the WhatsApp link there. Okay, I don't have it handy. Sorry, Shravan. So I thought that the QR would work. So here is the QR. You can directly paste it, but I don't have the link handy. Sorry for that. You can just drop me a message on LinkedIn. Happy to share the WhatsApp link there. Okay. Great, guys. So with that, we'll wrap up this session. Thank you for joining, and see you tomorrow in the next updated session. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thanks,
joining.
Mukesh.
Thank you.